Hey, pilot, welcome back to Ready for Pushback. I'm Nick Fialka. Today's conversation is a really in-depth look at what it takes to go from not flying to all the different iterations of the things you can do. We talk about aircraft sales, we talk about Part 135 flying, we talk about ultra-low-cost carrier flying, and we talk about major flying. All sorts of different things, and we even have time to talk about flight schools. So Art Walley is my guest today. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So sit back, relax, let's get ready for Pushback. It all started as a spark. Maybe it was the sound of jets racing across the sky, or the feeling of your heart racing as you watch a crop duster flying low and slow. Even then, you knew you were meant to fly. For pilots, it's more than just a job. It's a calling. The early mornings, the long hours, the relentless training, you didn't do it for the money. You did it for that moment. That moment when the wheels lift off and the earth falls away beneath you. But flying is just the beginning. The journey to your dream job takes more than just skill in the sky. It takes strategy on the ground and a lifetime of learning.
Most pilots don't understand what career opportunities are available in the world of aviation. Learn how to go from good to great, from flight school to regional to major, and from hopeful to hired. Whether you're sharpening your skills, building your resume, or preparing for that big interview, this is where pilots come to level up. Let's get ready for Pushback. Here's your host and my dad, Nick Fialka.
All right, Mr. Arthur Walley. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
Dude, I'm so good. It's a great day. I heard you've been flying.
I have, yeah.
That's cool. Did you have a good trip?
Yeah, it wasn't bad. It was pretty smooth, actually.
Did you run into any of that weather that was cruising across the U.S.?
Scooted over the top of most of it, thankfully.
Man, listen. Yeah, it caused chaos in my life. We ended up with like a fatigue call and all sorts of stuff. It was no fun. Weather is always annoying.
It is, yeah.
Man. So you've had a really long career. Why don't you recap kind of where you started and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, so I mean, if you want to go way back, I'm kid number 3 of 6 to a retired Marine. I grew up wanting to fly in the military, but family economics, I couldn't go to college to become an officer. So in my excitement to get out of small town Texas, I joined the Marine Corps and was gone a week after high school.
Really?
And then while I was in boot camp, September 11th happened. And so I spent 4 years in the infantry going all over the world. Towards the end, I went to Iraq. And after that, I decided, I'd rather go home and just hang out instead of making a career of it. So I came home, got married, became a police officer, did that for about 10 years. And then my wife, thankfully, she's very supportive and she has her own career, and she kind of nudged me to go chase a childhood dream of flying. And while I was a police officer, I met a couple pilots who had been furloughed at the time. So they came into law enforcement to make ends meet. So I reached out to them and was like, how do I do what you do? So one of them became my mentor, gave me some flight schools to look at and how to do it, and just kind of walk me through. Whenever I had questions, I called him. I would train on my days off, went from the police department, and eventually got all my ratings except for I never became an instructor. And then I got a job ferrying Cessnas for a dealership, for an airplane dealer. Did that for a few months. And then one of those former furloughed pilot friends of mine who was now back in the business had a friend and got me in touch with them. And I got a job at a company called Great Lakes Airlines, who are no longer in business. But I flew for them for almost a year until they went out of business. And then I started flying charter. And by this time I had transitioned. I was flying full time, but my days off from flying, I was working part time as a police officer just to make ends meet, trying to do everything I could to so my kids didn't see any hardship in the career swap. That first year at Great Lakes, I made $17,000, and that was in 2017, 2018. So that was quite a shock for the family. So I was working, almost 7 days a week. Did the charter thing for several years. COVID happened. A bunch of airline guys got furloughed or took zero timelines or what have you. And one of them came to my company. He had worked there before I had ever been there. And we got linked up, paired up together, started flying together. And I was also the director of training. So I was kind of picking his brain about, how the airlines did things, trying to standardize our company more. And he just flat out asked me one day, he's like, "What are your goals?" I was like, "Oh, I'm just hanging out, waiting for an airline to call." And he looked at me and he goes, "You're an idiot because these airlines are hiring like crazy right now. You have a lot of experience. You need to go find either a regional or a low cost carrier, get your foot in the door, fly for a couple years for them, and the legacy you want will come calling." So I came home and chewed on it for a little bit. Then I talked to another buddy of mine from Great Lakes that was an Army helicopter pilot, and he told me about RTAG. And so I went to RTAG in San Diego and just tried to feel out the industry and see what was going on. I walked out of there with an invite to interview with Frontier.
Ah.
So I eventually got hired from Frontier, went and worked there, and had a good time. And then finally the hometown team called me, and now I drive to work, and it's pretty good.
Yeah, that's so good, man. That is a long path. I'm interested. I want to kind of scoot back there toward the beginning of the story when you started finding those mentors to help you figure out how to go to flight school. Like, what are the things that they told you? What did you need to do?
Well, first, like when I found out they were, pilots, it was just small talk. Like, "Oh, I always wanted to be a pilot, but it never worked out." Kind of like when people come up and they're like, "Oh, I almost joined the military," and you're like, "Oh, okay, that's cool." And you don't, I could tell they didn't really know how to approach it. But I think the more I just inquired about the lifestyle and what it was like, they saw that I was genuine. And then my one buddy Stuart, um, I him and I just got along really well. And so the more I talked to him, the more he kept pitching a flight school to me. Now I don't know if I can say the name or not, but I went to ATP flight school.
Yeah, sure.
And at the time they had what they called a self-paced program. So I looked into it, and they had favorable financing in the sense that they had agreements with companies that would actually finance your training. And so, because I'd already used my GI Bill for my degrees, I didn't have any GI Bill left. So I reached out to ATP and I started looking at it. And then, Stuart was like, "If you're serious, man, that place will get you where you need to go." So I enrolled there and I started training like 2 to 3 days a week while still working full time as a police officer. But, it was funny. I could call Stuart and ask him questions, and he would tell me, "This is what you need to look into. This is what you need to look out for." And then other times I could call him, and I remember one time I called him like, "Dude, how do I use this E6B thing?" And he goes, "Man, I'm at the airline. Somebody does that for me. I have no idea." I was
No
like,
idea.
"Okay." So, the mentorship was, I'd say it was more broad scope from him because he'd been kind of like me now, out of the flight training days. He didn't know the nitty gritty stuff, but he knew places to go talk. Cause like, I didn't know what an FBO was. I didn't know where flight schools were. I had no idea how any of this worked, what a private pilot's license was. I just knew I always wanted to be a pilot, but I didn't know how. And so he started walking me through it.
That's a really good point, that somebody that can be a mentor to even if they're just kind of giving you general directions on where to go, once that's what you need to start looking for, you can turn over those rocks. You can find those things.
Yeah, for sure. A buddy of mine from the police department reached out to me maybe a year and a half ago and was like, "Hey, I want to be a pilot. How did you do it?" And I kind of gave him the basic steps. I was like, "You need to find a flight school that can like get you all this stuff, not just a flight instructor who says, 'Go find an airplane and I can teach you.' You kind of need to find some place that has a little stability, I think, so you can keep going." And it's only been a year and a half, and he's studying for his CFI right now. Just like,
that's great.
Blows my mind how fast and how aggressive he went after it.
That brings me to the idea of you need to know how you work best, how you study best, and what your risk tolerance is, because going to ATP, right, it's a puppy mill for pilots, right? They'll take you in and spit you out, but you need to, like, if you have to put out 110% to be able to make it through and be successful.
Yeah, they're not. That school's not going to hold your hand. They don't have time. That's not how they're designed. You have
Right.
to do it all yourself,
Yeah.
basically.
And I mean, it's quality training. You get a, all your certificates are very, very valid. You just need to know that's what you're going into. And so some people may not have that degree of get after it, or may not be able to, maybe they've got a family and are trying to manage having a regular job and do this flight school dream. And you need to talk to those flight schools before you get started and go in with eyes wide open, because there's a lot at stake, not just money, but also potential pitfalls throughout training that can really hamper you from getting hired later on. Whereas if you had a different model that you went with, maybe that's better for you. So
Yeah,
knowing yourself and knowing that, I think, is really important.
I think so. I mean, I saw those. It took me a year and a half to get all my stuff through that school because I was doing it under this part time thing that they had. But I saw some of those kids come through. Just they'd show up when they wanted to. You could tell they weren't putting in the work, and they washed out. They just and it was their own doing because there was nobody there to hold them accountable. You have to be able, whatever school you choose, you need like you said, you need to match what they're providing. If it's a slower pace where they kind of walk you through, that's good. But it's something like ATP or whatever, you have to have that drive and that discipline to sit down and do it when you don't want to, I think.
Yeah, I think that you probably had a little advantage being a combat vet to be able to have some life experience already to know um, the degree of effort that you need to put in to find success.
Oh, most definitely. I think I count all of my success in my adult life to 4 little years in the Marine Corps. It instilled the backbone for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It took me a lot longer to have that instilled. It took me like 20 some odd years, but finally got instilled in me. Well, you can tell your buddy to listen ready for pushback, and maybe that'll help him out a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I've told him the guy that was my mentor. He knows, I can't remember names, but he's worked with people I think that are started Spitfire or whatever. Like he knows them personally. And
Yeah.
he's like, dude, you need to talk to Spitfire. I'm like, I already got an interview with American. I think it's kind of, or I already said it, but I think it's kind of late. And he's like, well, let me talk to them and get you some pointers. But yeah, I think, I'm where I want to be, and I still listen to Ready for Pushback because I think Spitfire is doing something really good. And I think this podcast is just keeps motivating. Even when you're where you want to be, sometimes you need a little pep in your step to get up and keep going.
Yeah, especially when you're on day 3 of a 4-day and
Exactly. Yeah,
you're just like staring out the window thinking like, what am we going to talk about next? We've already talked about everything.
exactly. Yeah.
I want to know about the airplane seller. Like, how did you fall into that? What was that experience like?
Yeah, that was a great experience, and I fell into it by chance. They were at the same field that I did all my training at, so we saw them there all the time. And when I finished my training, um, I tried to get my instructor rating, and I fully own it. I didn't earn the CFI's sign off to go do the check ride. So yeah, I earned it. I wasn't quite ready. I wasn't up to standards. But the way the program was set up, I didn't have any money to keep going. So I was like, okay, I got all these ratings, but now what? Um, I don't have any jobs lined up. I can't instruct to make money and build time. How do I get to the next level? So I sent that chief pilot over there my resume and was like, hey, I'm looking to be a ferry pilot. And he called me in for an interview, and we talked. And he told me, he's like, you got a great resume, a lot of life experience and maturity, but I really need CFIs because these people, they buy these airplanes, they need training in their airplanes for insurance purposes. So I really need a CFI, but I'll keep your information in case anything changes. Like, okay, appreciate it. Thank you. Went back to work at the police department, just wondering if I had just spent the last year and a half, down a path that is not going to lead anywhere. And like 3 weeks later, he called me up and he's like, hey, are you still interested? Because I need pilots. I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'm interested. He's like, okay, be here tomorrow. So I went down to the company. He's like, look, you don't have a lot of experience. You don't have a lot of Cessna time because I learned everything in Piper Archers and Seminoles. He goes, so if you really want this job, go talk to John, I think was his name, the director of operations. He's like, get a GPU, hook it up to an airplane, and really start digging deep into the G1000 and figuring it out, because most of their planes are G1000 aircraft. I was like, okay, yeah, no problem. So every day I was off at the police department, I went up to the hangar, I'd get a GPU, I'd plug it in an airplane, I'd get out the G1000 manual, and I'd just start going through that thing over and over again and practicing loading approaches and doing this and working the autopilot. And Daryl, the chief pilot, he saw that, and then he started letting me fly with CFIs that were doing like maintenance flights or delivery flights or whatever. So I started flying with them, and eventually he's like, you're putting in a lot of work. You're going to do a check ride with me tomorrow. I was like, okay, what do I do? He goes, don't worry about it. It's just a commercial check ride. Okay. So the next day we went and jumped in one of their airplanes. Daryl and I took off. We did steep turns, stalls, slow flight, shot a couple approaches. We landed. He goes, yep, you're good. I need you to go to Wilmington, North Carolina tomorrow and pick up an airplane. And I was like, wow. All right. So I bought an airplane ticket, flew out to Wilmington, picked up a 182 and started ferrying it back. Got stuck in Georgia for, I think 2 days because of thunderstorms right there in, is it Columbus?
Yeah.
The big Army base.
That's right.
Yeah. Cool. And got stuck there for like 2 days because of thunderstorms. And Daryl was awesome. He'd be like, what are you doing? I'm like, man, there's thunderstorms everywhere. I don't think it's good to fly. And he's like, okay, go get a hotel. Call me when you think it's good. Like there was no pressure. So I flew for him for 6 months. I did a lot of deliveries, a lot of pickups, aircraft coming in to be sold or coming in on consignment. Since I wasn't a CFI and couldn't instruct new owners, I would just go pick up airplanes and bring them back. And then I do maintenance flights around North Texas and stuff.
That's a good way to do business. Like that's a good way to get some time and to get some experience and to jump into new places you've never been. Like there's a lot to that.
There was a huge amount because it was, they wanted IFR flying. And I was like, okay, I got to do IFR flying flight plans. I don't have a CFI holding my hand. I got to do this right. I had to do my own fuel planning, my own flight planning. I had to look around, try to find good fuel prices. Because I remember it was funny too, because I picked out an airport. My personal minimum was where I wanted a tower. So I was looking for class deltas. I wanted a tower as I'm coming into new places so I could get help if I needed it. And there was a place in Georgia. I don't remember the airport, but they had a college flight program there. And I picked it because it had a tower, but I didn't read all of the airport information to discover that the tower was closed during the summer when school wasn't in session.
Oh my.
So I was coming into the airport trying to get the tower on frequency. Nobody's answering. And finally the FBO calls up and says, school's not in session. Tower's closed. It's uncontrolled. Okay. Well,
CTAF.
Yeah, thanks. All right. So then I start, making my proper radio calls and land uneventful, but for about 10 minutes, I was like, why aren't these guys talking to me? I'm about to enter their airspace. What's going on? I'm in the sky on a 4 flight with my little Sentry trying to find another airport before I bust this airspace, before finally somebody called and said, we're not a Delta, we're uncontrolled, Oh, geez. So, it was grow fast. There was a lot of learning quickly.
Yeah, man. But the experience that you get there is probably some of the best that you've gotten. It was probably better than any of the airline flying you did.
It taught me a lot, but I think where I really grew was when I was at Great Lakes. Because Great Lakes was beach 1900s, no autopilots, no GPS, using VOR radios going into places like LAX and Phoenix. I remember when I got hired and they sent me like my little new hire packet of stuff to start looking at. They were big on RMI. And I was like, holy cow, I've only read about an RMI. So then I had to go to YouTube and watch some videos about people using an RMI. I was like, okay, I think I got this. And then by the time Great Lakes shut down a year later and I was furloughed, man, I could tell you where I was anywhere in the world with an RMI. That thing was awesome.
Yeah, so in the Navy, we started off with RMIs when we did instrument stuff, and we had this little Atari trainer on a Gateway 2000 computer that would like black out a screen and put an airplane somewhere, and it would adjust the RMI, and you would have to tell where you were and what direction you're going, and I think it was like heads will fall, tails will rise, or something to that nature.
Because
Yeah.
like
I
Great
don't even know.
Lakes, we weren't approved for iPads or any, and this is 2017, 2018. So I still have my case in my closet because nobody wants to buy it, but my big case needed to carry all the paper jeps, you know? And so it was pretty intense.
Yeah. All you got to do is be a really big curmudgeon, and then you're allowed to carry that again.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how those things go.
Yeah.
Man, it's a wild life experience when they just kind of put you into it and make you do it yourself, and hey man, it's up to you to survive.
Yeah. Sink or swim.
Sink or swim, sink or sink
Yeah.
sometimes. Just that's what happened to Great Lakes.
Yeah.
Um, wow. So fast forward, Great Lakes is shut down, and now you're moving toward the COVID times. What was that experience?
Yeah. So Great Lakes shut down in March of 2018. And I remember it was one of my days off. I was back in Texas working at the police department. There was like an all call conference call. So I'm listening to that call in the parking lot. And, they're like, we're shutting down. You're all unemployed, effective immediately, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, geez. Then my sergeant came walking by and he looked at me. He goes, Wally, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong? And I said, I just lost my job. And he looked at me. He goes, what? Nobody told me. And I said, no, not from here. My airline job. He
I
goes,
need your badge.
yeah. He goes, oh, that's real unfortunate. But, if you need to eat, we're pretty short-handed and we can get you back full time. I was like, yeah, I got bills to pay. So I went back to the police department full time, and I reached out to my mentor again, the one that got me into flight training, who I used to be a police officer with. He was back at the Legacies, and I was talking with him, and he's like, dude, my next door neighbor is the director of safety for this 135 in Fort Worth. Let me see what he's got going on. And I was like, dude, I'd appreciate it. So he gave him my resume, and he gave it to his director of operations, and they called me in for an interview. And I only had 700 hours roughly. I was really low time.
Wow.
And they called me in for an interview, and I did the interview, and they like, hey, we really like you. We'll call you back. We'll call and let you know. And this was for a Citation 2, a small Citation 500 series. And they had a contract with the local children's hospital. They flew doctors around Texas to go see the kids, so the kids didn't have to come to the hospital in Fort Worth. So It was a pretty interesting thing because it was like, I get to be a pilot, but I'm home every night. So they called me that evening, actually. I was standing in the kitchen, and they called me, and they're like, hey, we really like you. We want to hire you, but, market average for this position at the time in 2018 was $60,000. But you're really low time. We got to pay for your training. We don't know how it's going to work out. The company wants to offer you 50. I was like, okay. And he goes, so talk to your wife. And I said, no, I'll take it. He goes, you don't need to talk to your wife. And I said, I was making $17,000 a year before I got furloughed. 50 is pretty good right now.
Yeah, you just got a 2.5x pay raise.
Exactly. So I got hired, and I went to CAE in Dallas over there at DFW to get my type rating. And I remember everybody there was just dumbfounded that somebody with 600 hours, 700 hours was getting a type rating in a jet. And I was like, I don't understand. They're like, this is unheard of. Nobody comes here with this kind of time. So anyways, for 3 weeks, I grounded out, and that training was harder than Great Lakes to me because I was home every night. I wasn't in a hotel room away from my wife and kids. I come home from the schoolhouse, and I felt obligated to be a husband and a father, and then help cook dinner and clean and put the kids to bed. And then I had to go to my office and sit down and study.
Interesting point. I live down the road from the base that I fly at. I drive to work, which I highly recommend for anybody listening. And that's where the training center is as well. And when I every 9 months, we go back to training, and I pay out of pocket for a hotel room to go and stay 3 days there and sit and grind it out and study and not have to be dad or husband, just so I know that at the end of it, I'm going to be successful and be able to continue to keep the electricity on in my house.
Exactly. That's what I've started doing that too. If I don't get a hotel, my sister has a house like 10 minutes from our training center, but she doesn't, it's her and her husband. They don't have any kids, and I can lock myself in her guest bedroom, and there's like no obligation. So yeah, I've started doing that too. Like during training, I stay away because I got to focus. I've learned driving to work is awesome, but being home during training is hard. There's
Hard.
way too many distractions.
Yeah. That is, we have had that worked out for going on 10 years now of like, well, it's training. I'll see you later. I got
Yeah.
to get in a flight school mode.
Yeah, exactly. My wife,
So,
she looks at me, she goes, "You know the airplane. I don't know why you stress over this." I'm like, "Because
oh,
there's everything's on the line, babe.
every
One
time.
mess up and you're grounded, you know."
Yeah.
So,
Listen, man, I carry that
yeah.
anxiety with me all day, every day.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, that's right. Okay, so now you're flying Citation twos, and are you doing a lot of flying? Are you doing a little flying?
Uh, it's like 2 hours a day, but it's 5 days a week. I fly out to
Okay.
West Texas or up to the Panhandle or out east, drop the doctors off, hang out in the FBO, go get lunch. Doctors show up in the afternoon, fly back, put the airplane to bed, go home. So
Yeah.
it wasn't a lot, but it was good. And I was focused. I grounded out. If the company needed something, I did it. I helped. I stocked the airplane. I cleaned my own airplane. I didn't wait around for anybody to do anything. And after I was there 6 months, the company offered me to start flying a Citation 3, so a bigger swept wing jet. So they offered me another type rating. So I went and got trained in the 3, and then I started flying both jets. I was flying 2 fleets. And that's
Wow.
that's when things started picking up. I started actually like flying trips to faraway places, the other side of the country. And eventually the hospital bought their own jet. So we lost that contract.
Uh,
But the flying was still good. And so I continued on. That would have been, that was 2018. That was 2019 when I started flying both jets. And I was just trucking along flying both. And then eventually they hired somebody else to fly the 2. So I was more of a backup, but they kept both type ratings up for me. So every 6 months I was at the schoolhouse for one of the 2 airplanes.
wow.
And then in 2020, I got offered director of training. So I became the director of training for the whole company, for all the pilots, managing all the fleets and everybody's qualifications and keeping the manuals up to date. And I started doing that. And then
How difficult is that?
it was difficult at first until I got kind of into it and in a groove. And then it was good. It wasn't too hard. I had a really good relationship with our POI. And so I could call him up and be like, "Hey, sir, this is what we're looking at. This is what I'm thinking." He'd be like, "Well, yeah, no, you need to do this," or "Yes, you're right on track." And so having that relationship with the FAA, not being scared of them, made it easy.
Yeah, so you were able to ask the questions and not feel uncomfortable about it, and they were able to give you some good direction.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I could call him up and be like, "Hey, can we have a meeting?" And he would come to the hangar and I'd be like, "Hey," I'd lay it all out on the table and, just open with him. And he would, "Oh, that's never going to get approved," or, "This can get approved. This is what you need to do, tweak this here or there." And it was easy.
How much of the training world, like how much of your time was like separated between, hey, I have training stuff that I have to do and flying stuff that I have to do?
When I took on director of training, my flying slowed way down because I was in the office much more. And this was around the time of COVID. I'm trying to think. I think I was director of training before COVID, and then COVID happened, and I got furloughed for a month. Went back to police work full time. I still was doing that part time, so I called it. I'm watching their emails. They're like, "Hey, we got to spread all these patrol officers out because if somebody gets sick, we don't know what's going to happen." And so to keep everybody from getting sick, we're splitting all this stuff up. So I emailed the chief and was like, "Hey, chief, sounds like you're really shorthanded. I just lost my job. If you need somebody more than one day a week, I'm your guy." And he called me within 5 minutes and was like, "Can you be here tomorrow?" And I was like, "With a smile, I'll be there tomorrow." So that was how I weathered my second furlough, was going back to the police department. And,
Well, it just goes to show it's flexibility, it's putting your hand up, it's getting uncomfortable, and just making it happen for yourself.
yes, I mean, I got into flying because my wife was tired of the police life. She was like,
Sure.
"I knew you in Iraq. Now you're a police officer. There's all this turmoil in the world. No matter your thoughts about police departments, if you get killed, what do me and the kids do?" And
Right.
so that was when I was like, if I get killed, I'm killed. What do I care? I'm gone. But now some other man's possibly going to raise my kids. What's their life going to be like? So that, her push is what pushed me into going into aviation. But then every time there was a hiccup in aviation and I had to go back to the police department, it wasn't really what I wanted to do because aviation is where I was really loving life professionally, but it was what I had to do to keep everybody safe, basically, keep my family in order. And it made her uncomfortable. She was never happy. She's like, I don't want you to go back there. And I'm like, well, we got, like you said earlier, I got to keep the lights on. So
Yeah.
I'm going back to the police department.
Does she find it ironic that now you're like you traded one high risk job for another?
I don't think she sees aviation that high risk. So
Good.
because she doesn't hear the Velcro, the Kevlar every morning and every evening. So it's not as high risk to her.
That's right.
Then in 2021, I got offered my third type rating. So I started flying the Citation 10 when I wasn't doing director of training stuff. The company, we had started streamlining our fleet. So we got rid of a lot of stuff. We only had 3 fleets at that time. And the Citation 10 was our main fleet. We had 8 aircraft. And so it became really easy because there was less to manage. I had less programs to keep up to date and less site visits at training centers to do. And it was just kind of rocking with the Citation 10. And then I went to RTAG in 2021, and then I made my exit in 2022. And then the company called me back and was like, hey, we know you're at the airlines, but we're really struggling with this training. Can you do it part-time for us?
Oh.
I'm like, yeah, sure. So I did that part-time for about 6 months. The company sold to a new family, and I helped that guy out for a while. And then eventually it got to be too much. And I had to say, I need to walk away. So if you want to designate my successor, I'll hang out for a month or two, train them. They can call me as long as they need to, if they got questions, and I'll help them out. But I need to start pulling back.
Yeah. Well, you were at Frontier. That's before they had a Dallas base. So
Yep.
Where were you commuting to?
Vegas.
Orlando?
Las Vegas.
Vegas.
Yeah.
Were you crash padding it? Were you staying in a hotel? How were you managing?
Crash pad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For those that are unaware, tell me a little bit about a crash pad.
Well, crash pad run the gamut. I've had several. I had a crash pad in Denver when I was at Great Lakes. I had 2 different ones in Las Vegas, and then I had another one when I was Phoenix based with my current airline. They can be anywhere from an apartment to a house or a condo, and it's you or I own this place, and we rent it out to pilots or flight attendants or both. And basically, every bedroom has 4, 6, 8 bunk beds in it, and it's just stuffed full of transient people coming and going. Most of them that I had, you got assigned a closet space, you got assigned a cabinet in the kitchen, you got assigned a bed. That was all yours. You could do what you wanted. I did have one that was kind of like a hotel situation. Like you showed up and whatever bed was open, you wrote your name on the board, and that was your bed. And when you left, you put the sheets on the floor. And in the morning when the maid showed up, they put fresh sheets on. And so you didn't really have any place to store anything. It was kind of like a hot rack situation. This is going to sound bad, but it's not. The only negative crash pad situation I ever had was a pilot and flight attendant co-ed one. And that was basically because I was a 41-year-old married man in an apartment with a bunch of like 18 and 19-year-old boys and girls watching MTV Cribs and stuff. And we did not get it. Not that there was conflict. It was different lifestyles. So
okay,
yeah.
I thought maybe that curmudgeon in you was starting to bring that pub bag back out.
No. It was just different lifestyles, different. I wanted a place to sit down and go to sleep and like get ready for the next day. And they're talking and watching MTV and being loud and playing music, and it's like a party for them. And I'm like, guys, I'm trying to get rest so I can be awake tomorrow. I'm not here hanging out in Las Vegas,
Yeah. When you pick a crash pad, if you have the option to choose one that doesn't have a flight attendant portion, oftentimes those are a little lower key, a little quieter, and less chaotic, and that can really benefit you and help you be prepared so you're ready to fly the next day, because like really you're here to do your job, and all that extra stuff, like you're trying to make your way and move to where you can be a professional and get paid for it. And that's how you have to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, work's not a vacation for me. I try to avoid the crazy long, like 30-hour layovers and stuff. Like I want to go to work and come home. I want to be at my house. So, but I also don't want like the min 10-hour rest layovers either. Like I kind of like that nice in between. So I can go to the gym, go for a walk, maybe see some sights, but I don't want to be gone from my home just to be gone. Like that's not how I look at things.
Yeah, I know. I agree. As many days as I can be home, the better.
Exactly.
Man, so you went to RTAG with the first RTAG in San Diego, which is super fun,
Yeah, that one's
and then you ended up at F9. What was that transition like going from a Citation to an Airbus 320 with a Part 121 training program?
the training to me wasn't hard. I think Frontier was very well equipped and geared for their market, for who they were hiring. Because they have programs, at least at the time, where they would take people right out of the CFI world and put them in an Airbus. They had military helicopter pilots at the RTP program, military fixed wing pilots, charter guys like myself. So it was very, I say very basic, but not like in a negative way. It was very methodical about how they did it. NDOC was 3 weeks long before we ever got to the procedures trainers. And then the procedure trainers were like 2.5, 3 weeks long before we ever got to the full motion sim. So it took a while. For me, the hardest thing about it was some of the regulations, like what is it, that 38, 58.
Oh, the
Yeah,
exceptions.
that thing, like wrapping my brain around that stuff. 117 rest rules is still kind of really confusing at times. And then the airplane itself kicked my tail in the sense that I was going from pulleys and cables to fly by wire. And I mean, my sim partner was another 135 guy like myself. We both had multiple type ratings, and we got done with that sim session, and we both were like, we've made a mistake. I can't control this airplane. And then I called a buddy of mine who I went to flight school with, who was like 6 months ahead of me at Frontier. And I'm like, dude, I've made a mistake. And he started laughing. He goes, I was waiting for this phone call. I was like, Matt, what does that mean? He goes, it's an Airbus, man. You just have to understand the logic. He goes, if you are struggling by Sim 3, we got to worry. But just, keep focused, keep going, and you'll get it. And sure enough, by Sim 3, I was like, this thing totally makes sense, this fly-by-wire.
I think the thing you said that was the biggest, I think anybody that's flown an Airbus is you said, oh, I can't control this thing. Like, well, you don't control it. You control
Exactly.
it yourself.
That was what I was couldn't wrap my head around. I was like, the instructor was wanting us to do some kind of like steep turn demonstration, and he was taking it into alternate law or secondary law so we could do it. But then we were just all over the place. And I'm like, dude, I can do steep turns. He's like, yeah, not in this. You can't in this, man. You're not understanding the logic. If you can't do it by Sim 3, we got problems.
Yeah. Well, you don't control an Airbus, you influence it.
Exactly. Yeah. You're just a mere voting member. You're not controlling.
That's right. You're not, nowhere are you in charge here.
Yeah.
That's so true. So by then you had enough hours to have your ATP.
Yep.
And you were crushing. And how long did you stay at Frontier before you were picked up by your major?
9 months.
9 months.
But that wasn't my intentions. I thought it was going to be longer, and I was okay with that.
Yeah. I was there for one flight, and that is not what I had. I was really thinking I was going to be there for the rest of my career. And not that I still would be there and be super happy today. It's just not how it worked out. But
well, like you said earlier, they didn't have a Dallas base.
Mm-hmm.
And my big thing was I didn't want to commute for life. And so, the hometown team was always what my sights were on when I decided this was my path, because I wanted to drive to work. And then, when I did eventually leave, right at that same time, they were announcing a base here. And I was like, well, it's a little too late. I'm going to continue on with the path that we've chosen.
Yeah. And are you on an Airbus or a 737 at the major? What are you on now?
No, I'm still on the Airbus.
Still on the Airbus.
Yeah.
Did you feel like the training was totally different with AQP versus 121?
Yes. Yeah.
Better, worse, neither?
I thought AQP was too easy, if that makes sense.
Sure.
The guy that I was partnered up with new hire training was a captain upgrade. He had spent 5 years on the Airbus, 5 years on the 7-8, and now he was coming back to the Airbus to be a captain. And every day I would give him a ride to his hotel because it was on my way home. And, it's no need to wait on the shuttle. I'm going right by your hotel. And every day in the car, I'd be like freaking out about stuff. And he's like, Art, there's no boogeyman. This is a gentleman's training program. Just do what you need, study what you need to study, perform what you need to perform, and you're okay. And I was like, this is just too easy, basically. But I mean, I'd already been flying the airplane I've already been involved in the airplane from day one of training at Frontier for over a year. So I mean, I was familiar with it, so that helped. But then, Frontier didn't have AQP, so it was basically a commercial check ride in the airplane. Whereas AQP, it's not. It's nothing like that. You got training points you have to meet along the way, and they build on each other. There's no like, okay, today's the check ride. Let's do some steep turns and this and that. You did steep turns back in like Sim 2, and when they're done, they're done. You continue, you move on.
Yeah, last year I did an interview with one of the gentlemen that helped create the AQP program, and the philosophy of how it was developed, and everybody kind of has their own opinion. The fact of the matter is, like, we are living in some of the like safest flying periods in world history, and especially in American history, despite a couple mishaps that we've had this year.
Yeah.
It's still tremendously safe. So it is quality training, and it's building great pilots, and so it depends on what company you're with how they do their training. So you don't actually get to pick. You just do it. You just do what you got to do and make it happen for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I compare it to I like it so much better in the sense that like when I was doing the 135 stuff and flying 3 different type ratings or 3 different type jets with 3 different type ratings, the check ride was the exact same thing. I knew I was going to leave JFK. I was going to go here. I was going to turn over the White Plains VOR. I was going to do this. I was going to come back. I was going to fly this approach to 4 right and a circle to this runway. It was the same thing. And when I got to Frontier, when I got to my current airline, it was like, oh, I'm going to go to Reagan Airport and do some takeoffs, and I'm going to go here and do some landings. And I was like, this isn't a JFK, the same 4 approaches, and 2 of them are going to be single engines. It was way different. To me, it was better training because you got exposed to different things. It wasn't just the same 4 profiles and a sign off where it was in the 135 world. I was at different airports doing different things and basically flying their training and SOPs. Basically, they're teaching me their way of doing things. There was no boogeyman. There was no steep turn. I'm going to fail your engine right now, and at the same time give you a hydraulic failure and no flaps and block. It wasn't like that. And so it was really quality training. But coming from my background, I found it rather easy. As long as I did what I had to do, I was prepared every day.
That's it. And you got to be prepared. So, Art, first off, I love this evolution that you've had from enlisted in the Marine Corps to every single stop. I mean, you've done all the different things I think you probably can do. And so, like, when you look back on it, like, what advice do you give a pilot, a person that's thinking about aviation, that wants to do this job, but sees life is in the way and family and all the things that are in front of you?
If it's what you really want to do and you really have a passion for it, there's ways to be successful. But I believe personally that I'm an example of it's not always going to be easy, and it's not always going to be fast. I mean, it took me, like I said, it took me a year and a half to get my ratings, and then I failed at getting my CFI and had to face the unknown and get creative. I've been furloughed twice, and I've only been flying for 9 years. So there's hurdles along the way, but I mean, I remember during COVID, like applying to Walmart to push carts. It's like I got to do something to just make ends meet and keep going. But it's important to me. If I would have never had that mentor at the police department to sit down and be like, well, if you really want to do it, you need to go call this school because they're close. They got programs that can help you. That's where you need to go. So the mentorship to me was important because you don't know what you don't know. I went to 2021 as a attendee for RTAG, but in 2022 I was a red shirt volunteer. In 2023 I worked pilot meet and greets for my company. I got done with the trip on Saturday night and showed up Sunday morning and worked the room for my airline. And then in 2024 I was a red shirt volunteer again. I love seeing people working their way through and trying to be the motivation of, you don't have to be trained by the military and get soaked up by the airlines. That's a great path. It's a path I always wanted to do, but it just didn't work out for me. But I try to give back, and that's why I reached out to you to see if you wanted to talk, to tell people that, there are ways around this that aren't direct and they aren't easy. But if you're focused and stay the course, I'm confident anybody can get where they want to be in this industry.
Well, Art, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Appreciate it.
All right, pilots, that's a wrap on this episode, and I know what you're thinking. You need to make yourself a little bit better. So how do you make yourself a little bit better? You tighten up your resume. So here's what I want you to do. Go over to my website, spitfireelite.com/podcast, and you can download my free resume template. It is tight, organized, and it's the perfect pilot resume. It's just something I like to do for the pilot group, and it is free to you. So go over there, spitfireelite.com/podcast, and download your free resume template. While you're over there, look at all the services that we offer. Lots of great interview prep, lots of great application review. Everything you need to be a professional pilot is right there. spitfireelite.com/podcast. Thanks, and I'll see you on the next episode.